I've sorted out and we're live on TikTok. What's happening, team? Hope you're all good. Let me know how your day's going in the comments below. We're going to give it a couple of minutes, as we always do, to let these platforms populate. And then we are going to get into today's episode. Day number 5 of 5 of going live and recording a podcast as well, of showing up for myself and showing up for you guys. This one's going to be fucking fire. This has been requested by a lot of you guys. So we'll give it a few minutes, as always, just to let it populate, and then we will get into it. Guys watching on the replay, please give me a hashtag replay. If you're watching on YouTube, give me a thumbs up. You're watching on TikTok, double tap the screen, give me that love emoji, and we're going to get going very, very shortly. So I will say, and I'm going to say this when I open the podcast, but if you're watching this, get a fucking pen and paper, or if you're not watching this on your phone, get the notes app in your phone, because I'm going to be delivering a lot of actionable value in this live and in this podcast episode. So make sure you are fucking taking notes, gang. Right. Cool. Hit like as well if you are watching on Facebook. Remember, I used to be able to share on Facebook into certain groups, and I can't anymore when I was live streaming for some strange reason, but oh well. We'll just roll with it. Cool. We've got a couple on TikTok. What's happening for and on Instagram? Populating nicely now. Cool. Right. Okay. Shall we hit record and get into it? 3, 2, 1. Yes, gang. What's happening? Welcome to another episode of the Type 1 Movement podcast with me, your boy, Type 1 Tom. Now, just saying to the guys on the live then, for you guys who don't know, when I record these podcasts, I also go live on Instagram, live on YouTube, and live on Facebook, and now from this week, live on TikTok. So my username's the same on them all. It's like type1_Tom. So you can go and find me on those different platforms. But today, this has been heavily requested by a lot of you guys. So I put a reel out on Instagram and on TikTok, put TikTok out, and it was basically how I kind of bolus for this brownie and high-fat food. So I thought, you know what? Because when you're putting reels and TikToks out, you can't deliver that much information. I was like, I'm going to do, this is like long form content on a podcast, on a live, and go into exactly how to bolus for high fat foods. So make sure, like I say to the guys on the live, then make sure you've got your fucking pen and paper at the ready, because I'm going to be delivering a lot of actionable value and content in this episode. I'm going to talk you through a 3-step process that I use as a starting point to bolus for high fat foods. Now, before we get started, gang, please do your boy a solid. Do me a favor. Go and leave me a rating and a review on the podcast app, because it really does help me reach more Type 1 diabetics and positively impact our Type 1 community. Also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, give it a screenshot, share it on your Instagram stories, tag me at Type1_Tom, because I love it when you guys reach out and let me know you got value from this episode. Right, guys on the live, I want you to stick pizza, even if you don't like pizza. I want you to write pizza in the comments. Guys on the podcast, I want you to give me a silent head nod if you've ever eaten something like pizza, burgers, chips, cake, curry, Chinese. It might be chicken and rice with avocado, like a high-fat sort of meal, and you've got the carb count correct. You know you fucking got the carb count correct. Your basal rate's correct. Your insulin to carb ratio is figured out. By the way, I've done podcast episodes how to work out both of them, so go back, listen to them, because you need to know your basal rate, your insulin to carb ratio before you apply what I'm going to break down in this episode. So if you've ever eaten a high-fat meal like pizza, burgers, chips, cake, curry, Chinese, I'm a proper foodie, I love it all, and you know that your insulin to carb ratio is correct, but after a couple of hours or so, you get a spike in your levels, and you're like, fuck, I know I counted the carbs correctly. I know my insulin to carb ratio is correct. I know my basal rate's correct. Why the fuck have I gotten a spike? Why have I gotten a spike? Well, I'm going to explain why and how to sort of get a baseline to stop that in this episode. Yeah. So I want to explain to you. I don't just want to come in and say, right, this is how you do it, blah, blah, blah. I want you guys to truly, thoroughly understand what happens when we eat a high fat, high carb, or high protein meal, or even just a big meal. Yeah. We'll stick to high fats on this. Now, first of all, anything high fat can be relevant to the person. It could be that you eat a meal over 10 grams of fat or over, and this happens to you. You get a spike after. It could be that you eat a meal of 20 grams of fat or over, and you're good with anything under then. It's all relevant to the person. But I want you guys to thoroughly understand why this happens. Why, even if you get your insulin to carb ratio correct, you give your bolus after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes, you get in that spike again. So here's why. When we eat a higher fat meal, what happens is it kind of slows the digestive process of the carbohydrates down. So not to get too scientific. Actually, I'm going to, because you fucking guys, the type ones, need to understand this. When we eat carbs, broken down in our stomachs, converted to glucose. When we eat high fat foods, what that does is the fat content slows that process down. The fat content slows that digestive process down of the carbs converted into glucose, which instead, I'm just throwing numbers around here, instead of it taking an hour or 2 hours, it might take 4 hours, it might take 5 hours. So then you're seeing that secondary spike in your blood glucose levels after 3 to 4 hours, sometimes sooner, when your bolus has started to wear off. Yeah, so you need to understand this. You need to understand why this happens, not just how to combat it. So I will say that again. Make sure that you wrap your head around this. When we eat high fat foods, it slows the digestive process down of carbohydrates turning to glucose. When we eat high fat foods, it slows the digestive process down of carbohydrates turning to glucose, which means after a few hours, you can tend to get another spike. Or in some situations, you're going low in a couple of hours and then you're getting a spike. Or you go low in a couple of hours, you treat as a low, and then you get a spike up from the hypo treatment and you get a spike up from the prolonged effects of the high fat meal. This can be super fucking frustrating. And then you're giving fucking rage boluses, corrections, and it's like nothing's working. So I want to break down, that's why, and I want to give you some actionable tips on how I find a baseline to bolus for these sort of foods like pizzas, burgers, chips, cake, curry, Chinese, because I love all these sort of foods, right? I'm sure that you guys do as well if you're watching this or listening to this. But for now, guys, give me a fiery emoji in the comments if you can relate to that. You've got your carb count correct, silent head nod if you're on a podcast. You got your carb count correct, but still, after a few hours, you're getting a fucking spike. And you're like, fucking hell, this is so frustrating. That's why it happens. Fat slows the digestive process down from carbs being converted into glucose. Yeah, from carbs being converted into glucose. Now, I want to give you guys 3 steps that I personally use and that I get all my clients to use as a starting point. I will say that again, 3 steps as a starting point to bolus for high fat foods. It's a starting point. It gets us in the ballpark. We need to be willing to try again and make adjustments. You will not get this right first time. Maybe small percentage, it might work for you, but it's probably not going to work for everyone. You're not going to get it right first time. You're not going to stay in range first time. This is a thing with type 1s that you need to understand. Don't get frustrated when the first thing that you try doesn't fucking work. That's the name of the game. That's the aim of the game at the end of the day. We need to repeatedly try things and put the reps in so we get more data and we can make adjustments. Don't worry, I'm going to give you the 3 steps and then I'm going to give you a practical example on what I would do depending on the outcome. Yeah. So step number one is I would start with a 50-50 split. I would start with a 50-50 split on my insulin to carb ratio. So let's say, for argument's sake, let's say I'm having a meal that's high in fat and I work the carbs out and I know there's about 100 grams of carbs. And let's say, for argument's sake, my ratio is 1 to 10. I'm just throwing numbers examples out here for you guys. Ratio is 1 to 10. Yeah. So I know that'd be 10 units. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 50-50 split. So if I'm on a pump, which I'm going to do 5 units at the start, and I'm going to start to extend the other 5 units on an extended bolus. We can use a multi-wave bolus if you're on a pump. Over 3 or 4 hours, it may need extending longer, but this is a great starting point. So I'm going to do a 50-50 split. In this meal example, it's 100 grams of carbs. I'm a 1 to 10. I'm giving 5 units at the start. I'm extending the other 5 over 3 to 4 hours. Now, if you're on pens, what I would do if I was on pens is I give the 5 units at the start. And then after 90 minutes to 2 hours, I go and give the other 5 units. I give the second bolus. The caveat to this is if you're having a high fat meal at night and 90 minutes to 2 hours after is when you're in bed, you will need to set a fucking alarm to wake up as you're going to wake up high. You will need to set an alarm. That's why I advise when you're testing this, don't do it in your meal right before bed. Make sure it's earlier in the day. Yeah, make sure it's earlier in the day so you're awake to sort out any sort of variables or any out of range sort of blood glucose levels. So, right, step number 1 is I'm going to 50-50 split it. Step number 2 is I'm going to extend the second bolus if I'm on a pump over 3 or 4 hours. If I'm using pens, I'm going to wait 90 minutes to 2 hours as a ballpark figure, and I'm going to give the second bolus. Step number 3 is the adjustment process. So step number 3, if within the first 2 to 3 hours, I was to drop low, I know I've given too much insulin in that first bolus. Yeah, so step number 3, if within the first 2 or 3 hours I drop low, I know I've given too much insulin in that first bolus. Yeah, I've given too much up front. So what I would do is I would then change the split from a 50-50 to a 40-60. I would change the split from a 50-50 to a 40%, 60%. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, if I stay in range for the first 2 to 3 hours, then what I would do is, and then I got a spike after 2 or 3 hours. So I'm in range first 2 to 3 hours. And then that secondary bolus I've given, but I'm still spiking. I know my initial bolus was good, but the secondary bolus I would need to increase because it's not enough. I'm still getting that spike. Yeah. So that is the 3-step process and how I would make adjustments. Like I said, I'm going to recap. First of all, I'd do a 50-50 split. Chances are this isn't going to work, but it's going to get you in the ballpark and it keeps it nice and simple and nice and even because it's 50-50. It's easy to make adjustments from. Yeah, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is I give the first bolus up front and I give the second bolus, if I'm on a pump, extended over 3 or 4 hours. You may need to extend this further. You won't know until you've tried this and you've got the data from it. That's if I'm on a pump. If I'm on pens, I'm going to give the second bolus 90 minutes to 2 hours after. You may need to juggle around with these times, but it's a great place to start to get you in the ballpark. Step number 3, if within the first 2 to 3 hours I go low, I'm going to change the split. I'm going to try a 40-60, 40% up front, 60% extended, or the second bolus. If I stay within range, but then after 2 or 3 hours, I continue to spike, I know my first bolus was good, but that second bolus needs increasing. Yeah, second bolus needs increasing. Now, there is something else I want to consider from this, and that's if the meal is really high in fat, like a full pizza, as I go balls deep in on pizza at times, a full pizza. Even if you're using those 3-step process that I've told you, you may, and what I find is I have to increase my basal rate as well, because if it's really high in fat, it can really blunten the response of insulin down, which means it's not only blunting the response of our bolus, it's blunting how well our basal or long-lasting insulin works as well. So I'm going to give you another example of this. Let's say I'm on a pump and I'm having a pizza. So I'm having a pizza and I've sorted that out for argument's sake. I've done the 50-50, I've done the extended bolus. That seems to be all right. I know that's all right, but I'm still getting a spike. What I personally then do is I increase my basal rate by anywhere from 10%, so it'd be 110 or to sometimes 130, depending on the size of the meal. So I would go either 110, 120 or 130% increase. This if I'm on a pump. On pens, it's a little bit different. So if I was using Traceba or Lantus, I couldn't really do this. If I'm using Levemir, because we can split it, in that bolus around that high-fat meal time, I will probably increase that. That's a flip side to this that a lot of type 1s don't really get, that really high-fat large meals can actually blunt and not only the response from your rapid acting, but also the response from your basal insulin as well. So, guys, I'm going to quickly recap. This is a starting point that I use and I get all my clients to use for high-fat meals, yeah? For high-fat meals. Step number 1 is I'd start with a 50-50 split. Step number 2 is I'd extend the second bolus over 3 to 4 hours if I'm on a pump. Or if I'm on pens, I would do the second bolus 90 minutes to 2 hours after. Step number 3 is the adjustments. If within the first 2 to 3 hours I drop low, I've given too much up front, I'd change the split. If after 2 to 3 hours, I was in range up until that 2 to 3 hour mark, and then I start to spike, I'm going high, that means I've not given enough in the second bolus, or I've not given enough in the extended bolus if I'm on a pump. This is trial and error. There's a lot of variables that go into this. Yeah, and you're not going to get it right every time, but this is a great starting point that I use. And it's something that I see so many type 1s struggle with. They got the basal rate right. They know their insulin to carb ratio, but they really don't understand how to bolus for high fat foods. So they stay away from that. They're going out with their mates. They're ordering very low fat foods that they don't really want when they prefer to have a burger or chips or a pizza because they're worried about bolusing. And we don't want that. We need to be able to live our life, slot diabetes in and still manage it. So this is why I wanted to do this practical episode in this live today. Yeah. So guys, that is it. That's how I get all my clients to get a baseline to start bolusing for high-fat foods. This also works on large meals that take longer to digest. It also works on high-protein meals as well. If you're having a large meal with a lot of protein, because that can need an extended bolus from the way that that's broken down. Very similar to fat. Team, that's it. If you got value from this episode, please leave me a rating and a review on the podcast app. And also give it a screenshot. Share it on your Instagram stories so other type ones can obviously get this baseline and we can help our community out. Thank you very much for listening today. Have the fucking best day ever. Peace. Gang, right, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to go through comments and see how we're getting on. I seen some absolute donut trying to give me crap. That's jokes, man, on TikTok. So they are going to be getting blocked very shortly, but I appreciate your guys' comments or girls' comments, because the more that you comment in, the more the algorithm is going to push my video out to type 1 diabetics. So thank you very much. Appreciate you. So, right, let's have a look through. Zoe, is bolus short-acting insulin? It sure is. Bolus is your short-acting or your rapid-acting insulin. That is a bolus of insulin. You are correct. Cool. Let's have a look through. Just this absolute donut on TikTok. Absolute legend. Right. Let me manage. Block. If you guys want to go and get them, it's Lemon Yum Yum. Lemon Yum Yum on TikTok. But they are blocked now. Absolute jokes. Cool. Right. Guys, do we have any questions? Anything that we would like me to expand on what I've just spoken about? Thank you guys for everyone jumping on. Appreciate you all on Instagram, on Facebook, YouTube, you guys on TikTok. Besides the actual absolute joker that was jumping on, but hey, still appreciate it. Still gets my video pushed out when you guys are interacting, so appreciate you. Even though you blocked now. See you in a bit, mate. Right, team, that is it. Thank you very much for watching this live. Remember, give me a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, double tap if you're on TikTok, double tap, give me a heart emoji if you're on Instagram, and the same on Facebook. Just hit that like and give it a share as well. Right, team, thank you very, very much for watching this live today. Hope you got value from it. Until the next live, have a fucking great day. Peace.